In this world, it's easy to gain enemies. Something like liking the same person as someone else automatically makes them the competition and the evil nemesis to be beaten. But why do we create enemies? Is it our eccentrically different personalities? Or does your faith separate you from the everyday crowd? To answer this question, let's go to Daniel chapter 6. This is the famous Daniel in the Lion's Den chapter. And in this chapter, we are introduced to Daniel's enemies. And these enemies are extremely jealous of Daniel and all the position that he has in the kingdom. So his enemies go to the king, and they use the king's want and greed for power to convince him to sign a decree that says that his people can worship no other gods but him. And of course, Daniel is caught still worshiping God morning, noon, and night. But Daniel is not discouraged, nor is he afraid, even though the king is now forced to throw him in the lion's den. Clearly, Daniel had enemies, but why? In verse 6-5, it says, "Finally these men said, 'We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel, unless it has something to do with the law of his God.'" When these enemies of Daniel were searching for a way to condemn him, they could find nothing wrong. So they used his perfect God as a way to get him. They used his faith and commitment to God to be able to write down in the book of the king's law that Daniel needs to be condemned. Daniel had enemies because he followed God's way. Jumping to when Daniel was freed from the lion's den completely unharmed, it reads in verse 24, "At the king's command, the men who falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones." In the times of our tribulation, it may seem like all hope is lost, like we are all alone. Daniel was thrown into a den that meant immediate death to anyone else who dared to go near. But when face to face with his enemies, he kept his faith, kept praying, and never doubted God. Daniel's exemplary faith and understanding of who God is shows us a very important lesson. God will stand by us if we stand by him. The world wants everyone to be different and to never judge anyone for any action they take unless it upsets the general belief system. We serve a God who is searching for the good in the evil and blessing those who trust him. He has no room for those who don't have Christ's clean slate, and soon enough, this will be good enough reason for us, as Christians, to be condemned by the world. Now, I'm not saying that we should never integrate with non-Christians, or that we shouldn't believe some of the same things that they believe. I'm saying that the world's thoughts are tempting. They are created to catch our attention. If we devote our time to creating enemies for ourselves on earth, because of sinful things Satan brought in, then how will we have communion in heaven with God? We are sinful too. We fall into the web of sin that Satan has woven, but Christians have a way out, and that's not through the thoughts of people on this earth. It's through God's compassion and love for us. God wants us on his side. He wants to be our lawyer, and since he's perfect, you can imagine how long his record of won cases is. Let God in. Turn to him when the going gets tough, because he has the strongest shoulder you can lean on. Daniel had enemies because he followed God's way. Why do you have enemies?